crafty friends, what is up? Welcome back to my channel. Today I am sharing my first layout for the American Crafts design team, and you guys, there is a lot of mixed media on this page because my assignment was to make something with the Vicki Boutin Storyteller line, and I figured if I was making something for the queen of mixed media, I might as well get some mixed media on this page. So if you are watching just for the process, I will have timestamps so you can skip straight ahead to where the actual assembling of this layout starts, because again, there's a lot of mixed media. But if you want to learn a few mixed media tricks, then keep watching. So my first medium I'm playing with is alcohol inks, and I'm using some alcohol inks from Tim Holtz, and I'm working on vellum. And the reason you see a white background is because I've actually temporarily adhered my vellum to a piece of Yupo paper. Yupo paper is the substrate most people commonly work on with alcohol inks. You cannot work with alcohol inks unless you have a coated surface. If you put alcohol inks on like standard cardstock or watercolor paper, it won't move or won't do any of these fun things. It has to be coated. Now, vellum is pretty much paper plastic. So you can use alcohol inks on vellum without like treating the surface. So I just temporarily adhered it to some Yupo so I could see what I was doing as I'm working with the mediums. And so I started with pink sherbet, wild plum, and coral. And I have alcohol 90% in that little fine line bottle. It is actually a smaller gauge than the fine line bottle most people use. So this is the fine gauge. The yellow one that you see a lot of scrapbookers use is the standard gauge. This is the fine one. So there's 90% alcohol in there, and I actually have a paint palette, and in the paint palette is the darker colors mixed with alcohol, because if you use alcohol with alcohol inks, the alcohol lightens the ink color, and I didn't want this super dark saturated colors. Like wild plum is actually very dark on its own, so I lightened it with alcohol before I put it on my vellum, and then I'm constantly like spraying alcohol on it as I'm working with it. So I first would put down the wild plum and the pink sherbet next to each other, and then I added a little bit of the coral, also lightened with some alcohol, and then I'm moving my vellum around. So my paper has so much liquid on it that I could literally just swirl it around in my hands to get the alcohol moving. And then as I'm moving it, I'm drying it with my heat tool. So I put a little bit of alcohol on it to wake that color up, and then I dry it with my heat tool. Now, when you're using alcohol inks, alcohol and blending solution do two completely different things. Blending solution blends, alcohol lightens. So you'll see that eventually I reach for the blending solution when I work with the other color palette. I didn't need the blending solution so much here because everything was doing everything I wanted to. But if you see all those harsh edges on my colors, if that's not a thing you enjoy, then blending solution will help you iron out those edges, which you'll see when I do the green and the yellow side. I also added a little bit of the alloys in minted because there's a lot of gold in the collection that I'm using, which is the Storyteller line. So I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle and shine, and you'll eventually see what I do with this alcohol ink background. But I added a little bit of the gold, and then again, added some alcohol to get it moving, and then dried it with my heat tool. And I'm just using the Ranger Craft heat tool, the standard Ranger heat tool. So now we're going in with the... Well, I don't know if these are cooler because I use purple and pink on the other side, which is also a cool color, but we'll say this is the cool color side. And I started with dandelion and pistachio, and you see that the pistachio is also in my paint palette because I diluted it with some alcohol before. I don't actually have a lot of the more pastel alcohol ink colors because I figured I can dilute them with alcohol and make lighter shades, and I don't have like a giant craft room to store a million inks, so I chose like a pretty diverse ink palette, and then you can always mix and match colors to get like the color that you're looking for. So now I'm adding a little bit of Laguna, which was also diluted with the isopropyl, and then moving it around as I work. Now, you see I have little disposable pipettes. I just got those on Amazon. I have like a pack of 100 of them, so I just throw them out when I'm finished. But that's a really good way to dilute your colors in a paint palette and then pick up the ink as you're working. Also, you can use the pipettes with alcohol, so if you don't have a little fine line bottle like I do, you can just put alcohol in a dish, grab the pipettes, and use that to drop the alcohol on your page as you're working. Now you'll see with this side, I'm getting a lot more harsh edges than I got with the pink and the purple side. So I'm adding alcohol, trying to get the colors to move, but it's not doing exactly what I want it to do. So this is where you reach for blending solution. So instead of adding blending solution, I'm just putting more and more color, trying to figure out if that will do it. It's not doing it, so we'll get the blending solution. So the blending solution will help me iron out those harsh edges because alcohol doesn't do that. Alcohol just lightens the color that's already there, but it's not designed for blending, which is why you would use blending solution. Like, I feel like now that I'm watching this, I'm like, Tashi, why did you fight for this for so long? Why didn't you just add the blending solution? But I left this in the entire process so you can see what it takes to work with alcohol, like it does with alcohol inks. You don't get like the perfect blend the first time. Sometimes you just have to go back in and play with it over and over. And the good thing about alcohol inks is once it dries, it's permanent. But if I walked away from my desk and I didn't like the way this looked 20 minutes later, I could go back in with blending solution and alcohol and reactivate those colors and they will start moving all over again. So as soon as you add the I think solvent is the right word, but if you added alcohol or a blending solution to a finished panel, it will instantly wake them back up. So I actually pulled out my alcohol ink blower for this one as well because I wanted the colors to move a little bit more. So I softened a little bit of those harsh edges, added that minted alloy back to my panel, and I think after this, I'm pretty much finished with these panels. So you see, I started with this crazy muddy mess. Actually, it's still kind of a little bit of a crazy muddy mess. But you get these really beautiful blown out colors. And I wanted to make sure that there was different depths of color. I wanted the colors to mix, but I also wanted to make sure that there were places that the colors didn't mix, which is why I'm going back and adding a little bit of that blue because this was almost becoming exclusively green because the yellow and the blue were mixing and making more green, and then I was adding green. So I went back in and added a little bit of that Laguna to make sure that I had a patch of it that was just blue. So alcohol inks are done. We're moving on to our second medium. So for this one, I'm using the Vicki Boutin art crayons. This is the warm color palette. And so I'm doing some ink smushing. So I have a piece of acetate. I'm coloring directly on the acetate with some red and some orange crayons, misting it with my distress sprayer, activating it with a paintbrush, and smushing it right on a piece of watercolor paper. This is cold press watercolor paper, and I'm just making a mess on the background. So the thought process for my layout, I probably should tell you what the direction for my layout was, but what I wanted to do was have an explosion of butterflies across my page. So my husband and I spent about a half hour fussy cutting a million butterflies out of the Mariposa paper, and then I was like, okay, so I like these butterflies, and there's a stamp and a die set in the Storyteller collection that's also butterflies. So I was like, all right, what if we just make more butterflies? So the thought process was to have kind of stained glass looking butterflies on vellum, which is why I did the alcohol inks on vellum. And now I'm making watercolor backgrounds that I will use to also stamp on and make different butterflies so that I have different textures, different colors. I just wanted it to be like a riot of color and texture on this background, which is why you see me doing so many different mixed media techniques. So first I did the warm colors. I don't have the cool crayons, so I just pulled out my Distress Oxides, which I know work. So I'm using Lucky Clover and I think the blue's Chipped Sapphire. And these are just colors that I know work. This is a medium that I know works. So same thing, I'm smushing it directly onto my piece of acetate. And then I'm doing some dropping of the color with a paintbrush. So that's what I like to do. I like to do a mixture of the packaging technique where you kind of just let the color drip off of your acetate or your packaging or whatever you're using onto your watercolor background. And then I do a mixture of picking the color up on a paintbrush and just doing some flicking so you get the droplets all over the page. And all this does is add, interest. So you end up with really dynamic backgrounds versus having a background that's monochromatic with no texture or anything else. And that's why I prefer doing it this way. And The distress oxides, if you don't already know, they are water reactive. So by adding water to them, you kind of create watercolor paints. I haven't reached for my distress inks in a really long time, and then I saw someone do something really interesting with them, so I got to pull my inks out again, because I've been solely an oxide girl for so long. I got to pull my inks out again. But after this, I promise you, this is all the mixed media. So now we get to the fun stuff. So I've taken my media mat off my desk. We're back to working on that white surface now, so we can get back to work. So here's that stamp set that I was telling you about. So it's just, it has 2 different butterflies. It has a giant flower, a leaf. There's a sentiment in it. And the 2 butterflies, and the big flower have a die. So I figured I'd stamp that butterfly all over my panels. And then I used my Sizzix Sidekick, which is a tiny, tiny die cutting machine. It is my favorite thing because I don't enjoy die cutting. Like, it's not something that I enjoy doing, and I hate having to pull like my giant big shot out all the time. So I like that there's that Sidekick, because if your die is less than 2.5 inches wide, you can cut on the tiny machine. So you'll see, eventually I'll pull out my tiny machine after I stamp a few more butterflies down. So I just use a little bit of purple tape to tape my butterfly down to my die cutting machine. It has a little suction, so it's pretty much sucks itself in place on your desk so it doesn't roll around, and then you die cut your little life away. Now, I thought this was going to take me a really long time to cut out as many butterflies as you see on my desk, because there are a lot of butterflies, but once I got into it, it actually went by really quickly. Like, I left that little bit of purple tape on the die so I could tape it in place on top of my butterflies. And I think it took me maybe 5 minutes to cut all the butterflies that you'll see on my desk with this little die machine. So if you're in the market for a die cutting machine and you don't think you're going to need like a huge big shot, the Sizzix Sidekick is it's not expensive versus like a full-size die cutting machine. And if all you're going to be doing is cutting out like alphas and small flowers, highly recommend you look into it. So now we are assembling my chaos of butterflies, which was the end game. It took us, this video has been 11 minutes and 53 seconds long, and we are finally getting to assembling the page. I will put timestamps in the description box, so if you just want to get to this point where if you want to skip all the mixed media that I did in the beginning, you can get to this page, this point in the layout, which is where we're actually putting the page together. So I wanted the butterflies to start in the bottom left corner and then kind of just spill out across the page. That was my thought process for this design. And I wanted to use a bunch of different butterflies, which is why you saw I have the vellum, and I have the watercolor with the warm colors, and I have the watercolor with the cool colors, and then I have all those butterflies that I fussy cut in that coffee filter. And so the butterflies there were a few of the like orange monarch looking butterflies, but what I was really interested in were these smaller dark like black ones that had some jewel tones, because there was already so much color in the butterflies that I created. I wanted to make sure that there was some black on this background to kind of help ground the whole thing. So I'm taking a picture with my phone, which is something I do all the time when I finally have, like, when you're arranging a background like this, like, there's always the fear that if you take everything off, you're not going to be able to put it back on the way you wanted it to. And then I realized that I was doing this the silly way, because I wanted my butterflies to be layered over each other. So what I did is I started at the top and then just glued the butterflies heading down. So I started at the very top layer, and that way I didn't have to pick anything up off my page. I literally just lifted each butterfly up, put some glue just on the body of the butterfly, and you'll notice I didn't glue any of the wings down. And that's because I wanted to be able to go back in and figure out wherever butterflies weren't overlapping each other, I wanted to be able to just prop the wings up. So I didn't put any glue. So if you're doing a technique like this, if you ever have butterflies on the page, highly recommend you don't glue the wings down, because then you can go back in and fluff up the wings, and it gives you like some extra dimension. Now, obviously, once you put this layout in an album, it's going to be flat. But if you like to display your layouts for a little bit before you put them away, which is something I do, I like to display my layouts on the wall before they go live in the, I don't even put my layouts in an album, I'm not going to lie to you. My layouts go in a basket in the corner. But before they go in the basket in the corner, I do like to display them on the wall for a few weeks. Like I have a rotating layout wall. So I like to do stuff like this because it makes it look like the butterflies are about to fly away. And I just think it gives a really cool look to it after you go in and you fluff up all the wings. So I faffed about with these for a little bit, trying to make sure that it was balanced, trying to make sure that there were butterflies like in all sections and in all sizes and the different types of butterflies floating and looking like they're about to fly right off the page. So after this, we're pretty much going to start working on our photo because my background is finished and it only took 15 minutes to get here to get a whole background. But I hope you enjoyed seeing how you can take some mixed media techniques that you might not have thought of otherwise and use it to make a background that's really visually interesting and dynamic. So the photo that I'm scrapping is a selfie that I took a few weeks ago. I really liked the butterfly idea of like growing and then changing and becoming something new. And so I have this photo of myself like in the middle of quarantine. So there were definitely some things going on where I felt like I was growing and changing. And I'm using the papers from the Storyteller line. I love how saturated and how fun these colors are. After working with like pastels, which is it's a personal choice. I feel like I work with pastels very, very often. So having this like super saturated and jewel toned collection to play with all of a sudden is very different from what I normally do. And I was a really big fan of these colors. So now I'm tucking my photo kind of into the butterfly thing and I'm pulling out my ephemera. This is something I do every time I have a new collection to work with. The first thing I do is I pull out all the products from the collection that I have to work with, and I go through the ephemera like piece by piece. Now, what shocked me, which is a good shock, but what shocked me was the scale of these pieces. And the thing is, with an ephemera pack, you can't see like how big things are in the pack. So I left a lot of the flipping through in the video so you can see the scale of these pieces. These pieces are ginormous. And there's a good amount of pieces that are large and pieces that are like an average size, but I was not expecting some of these pieces to be as big as they are. And I was pleasantly surprised because it means you can do something that I enjoy doing a lot, which is playing with scale. Like, look at how big that book is. That wild. It's wild. I love it so much. But it means you can play with scale. So you can put things that are smaller on top of things that are larger. You can layer things. And if you know anything about my scrapbooking style, I love layers. So you can layer things. You can do so many different things when your embellishments are all different sizes. So I created a smaller cluster. I didn't want to make, my plan wasn't to over embellish with this particular layout just because there was already so much going on with the butterflies. I didn't want to do anything that would take away from the design of the page. So I'm just flipping through the rest of my products, trying to decide what I want to include on this page. You'll notice that there's 2 ephemera packs. The same thing, it has an icon ephemera pack and a kind of journaling ephemera pack. Which I really appreciate that designers are doing because it gives you a large variety of ephemera pieces to include. And then you also get a different, you get scale, which is my favorite thing. I like having scale and I like being able to play with how big pieces are and to layer the different pieces. So I'm gluing things down using my wet glue in my fine line bottle and the American Crafts tape roller, which is so much easier to use than my ATG. So you might see this in a lot of my videos going forward because my ATG and I break up on a regular basis and then I keep getting it back together with it even though it makes me sad. So I've layered these 2 pieces across the bottom of my photo, which I really enjoy. That one with the ruler says Lost in a Daydream, and then on top of that I put the piece that says Enjoy Every Moment. And on top of that, it says collect all the memories. And I just like the trio of the 3 words put together. I thought it was really fun and really dynamic. Now I'm going back and adding more butterflies because I'm seeing a few empty spaces that I could fill up with some butterflies. So I went back in and added a few more of them. Just because I figured if I fussy cut all these butterflies, I might as well get them on the page. And then I pulled out the sticker book. And I like the sticker book because it's a mix of metallics and like foiled pieces and pieces that aren't foiled. And I added that sticker that said happy because I wanted to include a little bit more gold on the page because some of my butterflies have gold in them. And if I already have the metallic on the page, I wanted to make sure that it was included in other places. So now I'm pulling out this stickers alignment guide. which is such a fun tool. It's very similar. So they have a straight one, which is just like a ruler, but there's other alignment guides in there. There's like one that's kind of like S-shaped. There's a semicircle. So if you ever want to do like a fun shaped title and you just don't know how to do it, a tool like this would come in really, really handy. So for my title, I decided to go with Grow, Change, and Fly. So I'm using the Midnight, sorry, I drew a blank for a second. I'm using the Midnight thickers from American Crafts to spell out my title, and I like that this sticker combination, the sticker pack had a combination of the lowercase font and the capital letters, so I decided to do a mix of the lowercase and the capital letters, putting half my title above my photo, and then putting the other two words underneath my photo, and staggering them, so that it wasn't all like a straight line. You kind of get that like fun zigzag flow. Playing with the butterflies again. I haven't stopped playing with these butterflies. Like, even I finished this project like 2 or 3 days ago, and I'm still playing with the butterflies. Like, I really just enjoy how fun they are. And then I pulled out the sticker book because I wanted to add a few smaller elements. And you know what I found in the sticker book? 3 guesses. I found butterflies. So I added a few tiny butterflies across the page, kind of like enamel dots, just sprinkling small things everywhere else across the page, and that completes this layout. So I hope you enjoyed my first project for the American Crafts design team. I had so much fun working on this layout and using a million different techniques and playing with texture. So please like, comment, and subscribe if you're so inclined. Let me know what you thought of about the layout in the comments. I will link the blog post if you want to go see further pictures, and I will see you next time. So till next time, keep it crafty and have the best day. Bye, friends.